The spooky encounter. It was a night shrouded in darkness. The old factory stood like a silent sentinel, its eerie presence sending chills down the spine. The protagonist, heart pounding, approached the rusted gates, each creak echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the flickering lights cast sinister shadows on the walls. Every step was a battle against the overwhelming urge to flee, but curiosity and dread kept them moving forward. The sound of distant whispers and the clanking of unseen machinery added to the growing sense of unease. The protagonist's thoughts raced, questioning the decision to enter this forsaken place, yet feeling an inexplicable pull to uncover its secrets. Duration 3 to 4 minutes. Bro, I gotta tell you something, and don't laugh, all right? This isn't one of those made-up stories you hear around a campfire. This actually happened. Narrator. It all started with my best friend, Mike. We've known each other since we were kids, always getting into trouble together. Mike was the adventurous one, always dragging me into his crazy schemes. Narrator. One night he called me up, his voice trembling with excitement and fear. He had found something he said would change everything. Narrator. He wanted me to meet him at the old factory on the outskirts of town. I could hear the urgency in his voice, and despite my better judgment, I agreed. Narrator. Little did I know that night would change our lives forever. So, you know my cousin Mike, right? The one who's always messing around, acting like he's scared of nothing. Yeah, well, he called me last week, freaking out like I've never heard him before. Said something about needing help at this old factory on the outskirts of town. I'm like, what's going on, Mike? But he wouldn't explain, just kept saying, you have to come now. I could hear the panic in his voice, and it made my heart race. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. The drive felt like an eternity, my mind racing with all the worst possibilities. When I finally got there, the place looked even more terrifying than I imagined. So I grabbed my car keys, feeling a knot in my stomach. I head out, driving through a deserted industrial area. The place was a straight-up nightmare, man. Rusted gates, broken windows, and an unsettling quiet. As I walked through the gates, the silence was deafening. It felt like the air itself was pressing down on me. The minute I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was heavy, almost alive, like it was watching me. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my eyes. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows, and every creak and groan of the old building sent chills down my spine. The atmosphere was thick with tension, like something was lurking just out of sight. I call out for Mike, but my voice just echoes back at me. The sound bounces off the cold metal walls, reverberating through the empty space. It's eerie, almost like the factory itself is mocking me. The silence that follows is deafening, amplifying my growing sense of dread. No answer. I'm walking through this maze of old machines, graffiti on the walls, puddles of God knows what on the floor. The air is thick with dust and the smell of rust and decay. Every step I take feels like it's echoing through the entire building, amplifying the silence. My heart races with each creak of the floorboards, each distant clank of metal. And then I see it, a flashlight on the ground, still on, but flickering like it's dying. The weak beam of light casts long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the place look even more sinister. I kneel down to pick it up, my fingers trembling slightly. The flickering light feels like a heartbeat, a dying pulse in this lifeless place. I pick it up, and that's when I hear it, a low, guttural growl. It sends a shiver down my spine. I freeze, straining my ears to catch any other sound. The growl is unlike anything I've ever heard before. It's a sound that seems to come from the very bowels of the earth, primal and menacing. Not like an animal, bro. Worse. It's like something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist in the real world. The sound is wet and raspy, like it's coming from deep within a twisted, unnatural throat. My mind races with images of creatures from horror stories, things that lurk in the shadows, like something trying to pretend it's human, but not quite getting it right. The growl has an almost mocking tone, as if it knows I'm scared and is enjoying it. My heart is pounding so hard I can hear it in my ears. I feel a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My heart? Man! It felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I follow the sound. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's stupidity, or maybe it's just the desperate need to find Mike and get the hell out of here. Each step feels like a step closer to the unknown, to something I might regret finding. Don't ask me. Curiosity? Stupidity? Maybe a bit of both. But something in me just couldn't turn back. I had to know what was making that sound, and I had to find Mike. The deeper I go, the darker it gets, and the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes. The walls seem to close in, the air growing colder and more stifling. Whatever it was, it led me deeper into the factory. The corridors seemed to stretch on forever, each one more foreboding than the last. The walls close in, and the air grows colder. I can feel the weight of the building pressing down on me, like it's alive and aware of my presence. Every shadow seems to move, every sound amplified in the silence. And that's when I found him. Mike, sitting on the floor in the corner of a room, shaking like a leaf. His clothes are dirty and torn, and he looks like he hasn't slept in days. The sight of him is both a relief and a new source of fear. Relief that he's alive, fear of what he's been through. Mike, sitting on the floor in the corner of a room, shaking like a leaf. His eyes were wide open, but it's like he wasn't really there. He's staring at something only he can see, something that's clearly terrifying him. I call his name softly, but he doesn't respond. His eyes are vacant, lost in some unseen horror. His eyes were wide open, but it's like he wasn't really... You know? It's like he's trapped in his own mind, reliving some horror over and over again. I reach out to touch his shoulder, hoping to snap him out of it, but he flinches away, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to jump out at him. The fear in his eyes is palpable, a mirror of my own growing terror. I don't know what happened to him in here, but whatever it was, it's left him broken. And as I stand there trying to figure out what to do next, I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone in this factory, that whatever made that growl is still here, watching us, waiting. The oppressive silence is broken only by our ragged breaths, the sense of impending doom hanging heavy in the air. I'm like frozen in place, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My breath caught in my throat and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. And he just points behind me, his hand trembling, eyes wide with terror. I could see the fear etched into every line of his face. I swear to you, bro, I didn't even want to turn around. But I did. Slowly, like in one of those horror movies where you know something bad is about to happen. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen, and I wish I hadn't. The regret hit me instantly, like a punch to the gut. My stomach churned, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. There was this thing standing there. It wasn't human, that's for sure. Its presence was suffocating, like the air itself was thick with dread. Tall, hunched over, with skin that looked like it had been burned, charred almost. It was like something out of a nightmare, something you'd never want to see in real life. The sight of it made my skin crawl. Its eyes were glowing this sickly yellow, piercing through the darkness, staring right into my soul. I felt exposed, like it could see every fear I had ever had. And its mouth, it wasn't smiling, bro. It was showing teeth, long, sharp teeth. It didn't move. It was like it was waiting for something or someone. The anticipation was unbearable. Just stood there staring at us like we were nothing, like we were just insects to it. I felt a chill run down my spine and my legs felt like they were made of lead. And then, out of nowhere, it starts laughing. This laugh that chilled me to the bone. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through my very being, this deep, echoing laugh that didn't sound right, like it was mocking us enjoying our fear. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard, and it felt like it was never going to end. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but there was no escape from the horror that stood before us. I grabbed Mike and bolted. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins and my heart was pounding like a drum. I didn't have time to think, only to act. The only thing on my mind was getting us out of there alive. Every fibre of my being screamed for survival. Didn't think, didn't look back, just ran. The sound of our footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, a frantic rhythm of survival. Every step felt like it could be our last, but we kept pushing forward, driven by sheer instinct. The walls seemed to close in on us, the darkness pressing from all sides. And as we're running, we hear it following us. Not running, not walking, just dragging itself. The sound was chilling, like nails on a chalkboard, sending shivers down our spines. It was relentless, and we knew it wouldn't stop until it had us. My mind raced with images of what it might do if it caught us. Its claws scraping the floor, getting closer and closer. Each scrape was a reminder of the danger we were in, a signal that we needed to move faster. The fear was palpable, almost suffocating, but we couldn't afford to let it paralyze us. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with the effort. We made it out, barely. The fresh air hit us like a wave, but there was no time to savor it. We had to keep moving, had to get as far away as possible. The sense of relief was fleeting, overshadowed by the urgency of our escape. The night air was cold, but it felt like freedom. I shoved Mike into the car, and we peeled out of there. The tires screeched as we sped away, the engine roaring like a beast unleashed. My hands were shaking, but I gripped the wheel tight, determined to put as much distance between us and that nightmare as possible. The road ahead was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of what we had just escaped. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw it, standing in the doorway, watching us leave. Its eyes seemed to bore into my soul, a silent promise that this wasn't over. The images burned into my memory, a haunting reminder of what we escaped. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting. Mike hasn't said a word about it since. He's been distant, almost like a ghost of his former self. The experience changed him, left a mark that words can't erase. I can see the fear in his eyes, the way he flinches at the slightest sound. It's like he's trapped in his own mind, reliving the horror over and over. Won't answer my calls, won't open the door when I go to his house. It's like he's trying to shut out the world, to pretend it never happened. But I know he's just as haunted as I am, maybe even more so. The silence between us is deafening. I feel helpless, unable to reach him. And me? I can't stop hearing that laugh in my head, bro. It's like a twisted melody that plays on repeat, a constant reminder of the terror we faced. I try to drown it out, but it always finds a way back in, gnawing at my sanity. Every night I wake up in a cold sweat, the sound echoing in my ears. I don't know what the hell that thing was, but one thing's for sure. We were never supposed to be there. It was like we stumbled into a nightmare, a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. And now we're left to pick up the pieces to try and make sense of the senseless. The world feels different now, darker, more dangerous. But how do you move on from something like that? How do you go back to normal when you've seen the unimaginable? I don't have the answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is that we survived. And for now, that has to be enough, but the scars remain, a constant reminder of the horror we faced. Gap 3S. Days have passed since that night, but the terror still lingers. The memories of the encounter are like shadows, always lurking just out of sight, waiting to pounce. Every creak, every whisper of the wind sends a chill down my spine. I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that the creature is still out there, watching, waiting. Gap 2S. Determined to find answers, I dove into research. I needed to know what we were up against, to make sense of the madness. Hours turned into days as I scoured the internet, digging through forums, old newspaper clippings and obscure books. The more I uncovered, the more disturbed I became. The factory had a dark history, one that went far beyond abandoned machinery and rusted walls. It was a place of disappearances, of whispers in the night, of things that should not be. Gap 2S. I found an old article dated back to the early 1900s. It spoke of workers going missing, of strange sightings in the shadows. There were reports of a creature described in ways that matched what we saw. The descriptions were eerily similar. Glowing eyes, sharp claws, a presence that chilled the very air around it. The factory was eventually shut down, but the stories never stopped. They were passed down, whispered among the locals, a warning to those who dared to venture too close. Gap 2S. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was part of something much bigger, something ancient and malevolent. The creature was more than just a monster. It was a guardian of sorts, a sentinel of the factory's dark secrets, and we had trespassed into its domain. Gap 2. S. I stumbled upon a grainy, black and white photograph of the factory workers. Their faces were grim, their eyes hollow. But what caught my attention was a figure in the background, barely visible but unmistakable. It was the creature, lurking in the shadows even then. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This thing had been there for decades, maybe even longer, silently watching, waiting. Gap 2S. I tried reaching out to Mike, hoping he might have found some semblance of peace, but my calls went unanswered, my messages ignored. It was like he had vanished, consumed by his own fear. The thought of him facing this alone tore at me, but there was nothing I could do. We were both prisoners of our own nightmares, haunted by the same relentless terror. Gap 2S. The more I learned, the less I slept. Nightmares plagued my dreams, vivid and horrifying. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the creature's laugh echoing in my mind. It felt like a never-ending cycle, a descent into madness. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I found myself questioning everything. Was the creature still out there, hunting us down? Or was it all in my head, a manifestation of my deepest fears? Gap 2S. The research provided some answers, but it also raised more questions. What was the creature? Why did it guard the factory? And most importantly, how could we stop it? I knew one thing for certain. We had to find a way to end this, to put the creature to rest once and for all. But the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and darkness. Gap 2S. As I sat in front of my computer, surrounded by stacks of papers and books, a sense of determination washed over me. We had survived the encounter, but that wasn't enough. We needed to confront our fears, to face the creature head-on. It was the only way to reclaim our lives, to break free from the shadows that haunted us. Gap 2S. The journey ahead would be perilous, but we had no choice. The factory's dark secrets needed to be uncovered, and the creature needed to be stopped. For Mike, for myself, for all those who had fallen victim to the darkness, we had to fight. The battle was just beginning, and this time we would be ready. Gap 2S. The creature might have been the guardian of the factory's secrets, but we were the guardians of the truth, and we would not rest until the darkness was vanquished once and for all. Gap 3S. To be continued. Gap 3S. The decision weighed heavily on me, but there was no turning back. I had to return to the factory to confront my fears and find the answers that eluded me. The night was dark, the moon barely visible behind thick clouds. Every step towards the factory felt like a march towards destiny, the air thick with anticipation. Gap 2S. As I approached the rusted gates, memories of that night flooded my mind. The factory loomed before me, a shadowy monolith against the night sky. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the creaking gates echoing in the silence. Gap 2S. The interior was just as I remembered, cold, dark and foreboding. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the decaying walls and abandoned machinery. The air was thick with the scent of rust and mold, each breath a reminder of the factory's long-forgotten past. Gap 2S. I moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the stillness. The creak of floorboards, the distant drip of water, the occasional rustle in the shadows, it all set my nerves on edge. But I pressed on, determined to find the truth. Gap 2S. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the factory, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature was here, watching, waiting. Gap 2S. I gathered my courage and followed the sound, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn leading me deeper into the factory's dark heart. I could feel the creature's presence, a malevolent force lurking just out of sight. Gap 2S. I reached a large open space filled with rusted machinery and broken crates. The air was colder here, almost suffocating. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I saw it. The creature standing in the center of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Gap 2S. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't back down. I had come too far. I took a step forward, my voice trembling as I called out to the creature. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Gap 2S. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. It moved closer, its presence overwhelming. But instead of attacking, it simply watched, as if waiting for something. Gap 2S. I realized then that this was no mindless monster. There was intelligence in those eyes, a purpose. The factory's dark secrets were tied to this creature, and I needed to understand why. Gap 2S. I took another step forward, my fear slowly giving way to determination. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," I said, my voice steadier now. The creature tilted its head, its gaze never leaving mine. Gap 2S. And then something incredible happened. The creature began to fade, its form becoming translucent. It was as if it was merging with the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. Gap 2S. I watched in awe as the creature disappeared completely, leaving behind a sense of profound emptiness. The factory felt different now, less oppressive. It was as if the creature had been a guardian, a sentinel of the factory's secrets. And now, it had passed the torch to me, Gap 2S. I knew then that my journey was far from over. The answers I sought were still out there, hidden in the factory's depths, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the creature and survived, and now I was ready to uncover the truth. Gap 2S. As I left the factory, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds. The darkness was lifting, both outside and within, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was just beginning, but I was ready. Gap 3S to be continued.